tax dollars don't fall prey to waste, fraud, and abuse. For over a year now, I have been asking for a special inspector general to make sure they're not stealing our money. We've had one in Afghanistan, and he and his team of economists and technicians have overseen and found billions of dollars worth of waste that they've saved. We need the same thing in Ukraine, a special inspector general to make sure they're not stealing our money. When that has come before a vote in the Senate, the majority party in here says, no, we just want to spend the money. We don't care. Some Republicans have gone along with this as well, and they have voted against an inspector general. It is a terrible abuse of our spending authority to spend money overseas in a war and not make sure that they're not stealing it. So in addition to the colossal cost of the war, we end up paying a corruption tax. Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries on the planet, maybe second only to Russia. Corruption runs deep in Ukraine, and there's plenty of evidence that it has run rampant since Russia's invasion. As President Zelensky landed in New York earlier this week, we learned that corruption concerns in Ukraine's Ministry of Defense resulted in the firing of 6 deputy defense ministers. This comes 2 weeks after the firing of Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov, who was removed after it was discovered that the Ministry of Defense had mishandled military contracts. Last month, Zelensky fired all 24 regional military recruitment chiefs because they were, quote, involved in illegal activities, including enrichment. Last October, we learned that U.S. shipment of grenade launchers, machine guns, rifles, bulletproof vests, and thousands of rounds of ammunition were ending up in the hands of criminal gangs and weapons traffickers posing as humanitarian organizations. And what did the Senate do? They voted against a special inspector general to make sure they're not stealing our money. What are we doing? Is this fair to the American people? Millions of Americans are struggling each day to make ends meet. Millions of Americans are struggling to provide for their families and put food on the table. Can we honestly look our constituents in the eye and tell them that this is a good investment of their dollars? Some say the war in Ukraine is a fight to save democracy. But those who say that need to be honest with themselves. Ukraine is far from a shining example of democracy. And while the strain of war can make for questionable government actions, we have to live with them when the war is over. For all the platitudes about America supporting democracy and making the world safe for democracy, the Woodrow Wilson advocates among us, the biggest recipient of American welfare, Ukraine, canceled its next presidential election. You're telling me we're sending $100 billion to a country that's not going to have elections? We're going to send $100 billion to a country that now has, what, a president for life? I say, oh, well, we could, but it's difficult. Does anybody remember the American Civil War, where 600,000 people died, and yet we didn't miss an election? They've canceled the presidential election. We should cancel our aid as a response. This is not the only concerning development in Ukraine. Despite Zelensky's charm offensive this week, his actions also deserve scrutiny. Citing national security concerns, Zelensky has banned Orthodox churches oriented towards the Russian Orthodox Church and has ordered Ukrainian law enforcement to raid churches and arrest priests. He has banned the political opposition. How do you have a democracy if you're not going to have elections and you banned the opposition? He suspended 11 political parties, including the Opposition Platform for Life, the second largest party in Ukraine's parliament and the one which held 44 seats. He has attacked free speech by banning opposition media and increasing his government's regulatory power over journalists. Hardly sounds democratic to me. Earlier this year, he signed into law a bill that allows Ukraine's state broadcasting council to regulate all media in Ukraine. The council can impose mandatory orders, fines, restrict content from search engines, and even outright suspend media outlets without a court decision. Hardly sounds very Democrat to me. If you wish these actions that sound like the actions of an authoritarian regime, if you suspect these do sound like an authoritarian regime, regime, you're right. This past July, a Swiss intelligence report observed, quote, authoritarian traits in Zelensky as he tries to push the mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, out of contention for Ukraine's 2024 presidential elections. Citing martial law, Zelensky stated that those elections will not take place. Martial law, no elections, banning opposition party. This is where your $100 billion has gone, and they're not done. We don't have the money. The money's being borrowed. We borrow the money from China to send it to Ukraine. In 2021, Zelensky fired multiple government officials, including his prime minister, for investigating a Ukraine oligarch who just happened to be a key backer of Zelensky's presidential campaign. The United States placed sanctions on this oligarch for his involvement in significant corruption, and earlier this month he was finally arrested. Clearly, Ukraine and the regime are not paragons of democracy. But this is not just about what Ukraine is or is not with respect to government. This is about American interests and our national security. Every day this war continues is another spin of the roulette wheel with another chance of it stopping on Armageddon. And we are paying for the privilege. We cannot continue with business as usual. We cannot continue to put the needs of other countries above our own. We cannot save Ukraine by dooming the U.S. economy. And we certainly cannot save Ukraine by fighting a war with Russia. As we go further and further into debt, we become weaker. It's not just that this is not helping our national security. The very threat to our national security is our debt. The more we send money overseas, the more we deplete our munitions, the worse things get. No matter how sympathetic we are to the Ukrainian people, we must put the American people first. And to that end, I encourage my colleagues to oppose any effort to hold the federal government hostage for Ukraine funding. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.